beyond. But that golden age had long since passed, and the route had dried up. Only the local herdsmen, as well as the scouts that the commander kept sending into the nearby ravines, ever dared to venture along the old route and ascend into the inhospitable mountains. But something strange had been going on with the scouts recently. The second squad of Northerners was already late, even though it was long past the deadline when they should have returned. The commander was taking his frustration out on the captains, and they, consequently, were taking it out on the sergeants and the common soldiers. The guard, unlike the officers, secretly rejoiced that the squad, in which the red-haired Ganor served, was still wandering around the neighboring environs. Luke owed the Northerner money, but he didn't have very much money at the moment. He'd blown too much of it on the dice last time. Almost all of his wages had disappeared into his debts, into other people's purses, screw-a-toad. All there was in his purse right now was one soul, a small silver coin, and that was not nearly enough money for Ganor, but he had to find a way to pay him back. The Northerners were a straightforward people, and if everything wasn't just so, he'd get it right in the choppers. The soldier leaned out of the arrow loop and spat with relish. He followed the spittle with his eyes, hoping it would land on some heedless idiot, but to Luke's intense disappointment, there was no one standing under the wall. For the 100th time since that morning, he swore an oath and then resumed his contemplation of the landscape. A small town was spread out in front of the gates. The humble dwellings were constructed of round stones and clay, which had been taken from the banks of a nearby mountain river. The families of shepherds, wool merchants, and silver miners lived in the settlement. The villagers were not frightened to be living on the very edge of the empire. The fortress was impregnable, the soldiers experienced. None of the mountain tribes would bother them here. They had already taken it on the nose more than once, and they knew that they couldn't seize the gates. It would be quicker to gnaw a passage under the mountains than to tear down the mighty walls of the impregnable fortress. Despite the fact that it was early summer, the air smelled slightly of frost. Rays of sunlight painted the snowy heights of the mountains with rose, and the peaks were shrouded in clouds. The sun was slowly climbing up from behind the eastern range. Another minute passed, and the sun began to shine so brightly on the summits that Luke screwed his eyes shut and once again called on his toad. When the guard opened his eyes, he saw that 2 skinny mules hauling an old caravan had appeared on the empty morning road. From such a height, the caravan was no bigger than the palm of his hand, but Luke could clearly make out a woman sitting on the driver's seat. She was dressed almost entirely in rags. She looked just like a stuffed scarecrow. The soldier frowned in confusion. Had one of the villagers taken it into her head to set off for El Nietzsche Ford? It was 15 leagues away. It would be stupid to haul wool to the fair, which had been arranged in honor of the Feast of the Name. To have any chance of trading goods, she should have set out 6 days earlier. Now she was just wasting the labor of her animals for nothing. Even if she hurried, she'd get there far after the trading had ended. A strange caravan. He didn't recognize it, and that old woman, more like a beggar than anything else. Luke frowned, trying to recall if there was anyone in town who had 2 such emaciated mules, not to mention a caravan with a blue top. A quick rundown of all his acquaintances' names and nicknames gave him nothing. If the guard could trust his memory, he'd never seen such a piece of junk. And after all the time he'd served here, standing by the wing, the soldier knew everyone who did business at El Nietzsche Ford quite well. One of 2 things was going on. First, she could be someone who